I get to sit here and talk. Pete puts on his headphones, and the thing is, you think he's listening to sound. He's not. Pete's listening to the new Nickelback album right now. I got that one, and then over here, and then back up there. You do the hokey pokey.
That's kind of cool. That's a fun toy. I want a toy.
Kathleen.
Mark Jacksina.
Thanks for meeting me today.
Dude.
This is nerve-wracking and exciting.
Now, why is it nerve-wracking?
Starting with the enemy as a chef.
Ah.
And the food and the food writer, food editor.
Yes, you remember what I always tell you. No one calls me a restaurant critic. I am not a restaurant critic.
What's the difference?
Well, first of all, I believe a big difference between restaurant critics and restaurant reviewers. You know, a critic is, the idea of a critic is all you're doing is criticizing. Mm-hmm. And a good restaurant review tells you a story. It tells you not how the food tastes, but what level it's prepared to, what story the restaurant's trying to tell, what their background is, what its value is, what its place is in your city's history. And on top of all that, everybody knows my face, so I don't review restaurants. I write about food.
Did you ever do reviews for? I
have occasionally, but not much. I was always the reporter that everybody saw. Mm-hmm. I was the public face of, Observer food reporting. I was the one who could go and meet chefs face to face. Helen Schwab was our restaurant reviewer, and she could not have one-on-one contact with chefs. So that always fell to me. But I was also the person for years who wrote about how to cook. I used to tell people that my beat was how to cook, when to cook, where to cook, what to cook, and why to cook. I was taking the things you guys do mm-hmm. and trying to tell people, here's how you can learn something from that and take it home. So that was a big part of what I did.
The success of a newspaper depends on many things: integrity, just plain honesty, service in the cause of good government, skilled craftsmen, reporters and editors devoted to their calling. How did you end up as a food writer? Because that wasn't what you started off to do, correct?
No, it's not what I started out to do. I fell in love with newspapers when I was 10 years old. When I found
what was it about newspapers that you fell in love with?
I found out they would pay you to write. And when I was a little kid, I came from a pretty poor family, and my parents loved to read. They mm-hmm. were very self-taught people. And so there was always this reverence for the written word in our house. And I would write stories. Like when I was a little kid, I was always like, under the sheets at night with mm-hmm. with my flashlight and my crayon writing stories. But I thought that people who wrote for a living were rich people who could afford to do whatever they wanted to do. And then I found out one day my mother went to college late. She started college nights when she was in her 50s. And she had to go down to the morgue of the newspaper and pick up a clipping, which she used to physically have to go and get a copy of a clipping from a newspaper. And she took me down there, and it happened to be 5 o'clock when we walked into the newsroom at the Palm Beach Post. I was 10 years old. And there was this palpable energy in that room. There were teletypes going off, and there were editors running around, and there were reporters clacking away. Mm-hmm. And I looked around and went, what is this place? This is magic. I want to be here. My mom said, well, you know that newspaper that lands in our driveway that you pay no attention to? Somebody is paid to write the things that go in there. And I was like, I'm there. That's my place. I will be there. And I got there when I was in high school. Started out at a newspaper when I was 17 years old, actually as a high school intern.
But you knew at like 10 years old, you're like, this is what I'm doing?
This is me. This is what I'm going to do with my life. And here I am, coming up on 60.
And where did you grow up?
West Palm Beach. My family's from all over the South.
Mm-hmm.
My folks are from Georgia. Mom's from Atlanta. Dad was from Americus, Georgia. And we lived in Wilson till I was 9 years old, Wilson, North Carolina. And then Daddy got transferred to Florida, and I grew up in Florida. And the one member of my family that's left now, my sister, is still in West Palm Beach. My family's been down there since 1969.
Okay.
So, yeah, but I got back to the real South as quick as I could.
So then you, the real
South. I
South.
headed up to Tallahassee when I was, I was 21 when I started college, because I had to work to earn money,
Right.
There wasn't money.
So you started working at the paper when you were 17.
So you
were working there before you went to college.
Yeah, I worked for 3 papers before I ever went to college. I was a copy boy, what they used to call a copy boy in those days, yes.
What do they call them nowadays?
Well, we don't have them anymore because everything's computerized. But back in the day, when a newspaper was a physical operation, you had to have people, minions who were moving around, sorting the copy that was coming in on the wire machines, and taking the copy to the desk, and then picking up the finished copy and taking it out to the composing room, and then bringing the page proofs of the pages back. And that was actually how I learned how to write, and how I learned how to do all those jobs to put together a paper. Was I got to see everything from start to finish. I mean, I wasn't just walking around with paper and not looking at it. I was looking all the time. Oh, that's how they edited that story. That's how they, you know, wove it together. That's how they decided how it's going to end up on the page.
So you get to watch the process, just one story.
Beginning to end. That's how you crop a picture. You know, so that's how I learned how to do it. And I talked my way into a job at the Palm Beach Post as a copy boy after I'd been an intern there, because I knew everybody in the newsroom. So they went ahead and hired me, and then I talked my way up to being able to be a writer and a beginning editor on a couple of the smaller papers that they owned. And that's how I got paid jobs. Go out and grab every opportunity you get.
This building is different than every other building in Camp North End because instead of being built out of steel and masonry, it was built out of timber. And it's beautiful inside.
Yeah.
So you got to Charlotte in what
1985.
year? 1985.
I came in 1985. I worked on the Metro layout desk, which was basically the city desk, but it was state and local news. And we did the 6 editions a night. And a lot of times we might have 15 minutes between editions. You had to learn to move fast and be very organized, which I've always been, you know, very organized in how I go about things. And then I moved over to the night copy desk, writing headlines, editing stories, all those things. And then I moved back to features, to be on the features copy desk. And long about that time, the food section had fallen out of favor. People thought food coverage was not relevant anymore. They thought people weren't cooking at home anymore. We had, our last food editor had retired, and they were going to kill the food section. It didn't have the same advertising. Food sections used to be cash cows because of those full-page grocery store ads, man. Those things made a ton of money. And when the grocery stores stopped advertising that way, they thought, oh, well, you know, we're going to kill the food section. And so I went to them and said, you know, I love the food section. I think there's something really exciting, stories to be told here. Let me have it. Let me look after it. So they gave me 6 hours a week and told me that I was just going to oversee it while they killed it. And I was only supposed to fill it with wire every day and not write anything for it. So I started writing stories on my weekends and sneaking them in. And people started reacting to them. Readers started reacting.
Do you remember what your first piece was that you snuck in?
Yeah, I think there was a story that I did. Helen Schwab had been in charge of the section until they handed it over to me, and she gave me some press release that had something to do with some M&M's dispenser. And I wrote a goofy story with my sense of humor, and people responded to it. And then I started doing things like, I wrote a big thing on how to make a sauce. I would go teach myself how to do something, and then I would write a story about how I taught myself to do that thing. And people started to respond to it.
And how would, back then, how would you generate? I mean, now you know because it's clicks. It's all about clicks.
Right, now we know what people are reading, which is the horror and hell of our lives now. But in those days, you know, you really didn't know. It was like hollering into a wind tunnel. You know, I would write things just because they were interesting to me. And I would think, you know, if I'm interested in this, somebody else will be interested in this.
Sure.
If I don't know this, somebody else doesn't know this and wants to know it. And so I would really do stories like that. When I first started writing food, my editors didn't cook. My editor at the time truly did not cook at all, knew nothing about cooking. And I would go to her and say, hey, you know, what if I did a story on, you know, how to make a pie crust? And she'd go, okay, fine, whatever. And here I was, a beginning food writer, and I had total autonomy. Nobody was really supervising. They'd read my copy, but they didn't push back a lot. I get more pushback now that I've been doing it 40 years than I did when I've been doing it none. There was no existing beat. You know, I could make it up. I could just do what was fun for me.
Now, what was the dining scene like at that time here in Charlotte?
Lordy. What was that dining scene in Charlotte?
Was there such a thing?
Yeah, actually there was a little bit of one. I did not have a credit card when I went to interview here. I was young and poor. I had no money. I had no credit card. And so as soon as I got here and I had this nice fat big city paycheck, I got a credit card. And the first place I took my first credit card, first charge I ever made on one was Jonathan's. I went to Jonathan's uptown and bought myself a fancy dinner. There were special occasion places like that, the Lamplighter, Epicurean, oh golly, what was that French place? Chez Daniel. Was it Chez Daniel?
That was before my time.
Yeah. Oh, okay. It was off East Boulevard, tucked back.
Lamplighter and Jonathan's I'd heard about.
Yeah, yeah. So there were sort of nice places to go out for sort of the nice crowd. And then there were the little Greek diners that were everywhere. There was, Stacino's and Anderson's and, all of these, the D&P Cafe. These were all Greek-owned places that, of course, didn't serve Greek food. They served basically Southern and very American food. But it was that kind of town. It was either you had blue collar or you had white tablecloth, and there wasn't a whole lot in between.
Right.
That was Charlotte dining in '85. Back when newspapers used to count for something. My one moment of greatness.
You have a connection with the James Beard Foundation.
Yeah, whoops, dropped an earring. I don't wear a lot of jewelry. I'm not a fancy girl.
You didn't have to get fancy for us. We're not fancy people.
Yeah, well, and you know what? I can't get that back in. I'm just gonna take it off. Ooh, now we're getting serious.
Now we're getting serious.
Off the jewelry. Yeah.
She's about to throw down.
Throwing down the earrings. So yes, the James Beard Foundation. I had this really weird thing happen in my life. So I had a cookbook review column, actually. I was reviewing cookbooks every other week and running the reviews in the Observer, and I was a judge for their cookbook awards.
For the Charlotte Observer's Cookbook Awards?
No, for the James Beard
Cookbook
Awards.
So it's related with them. How did you connect with them?
Okay, well, so the cookbook committee was losing a couple people who were shifting to the journalism committee because they had term limits. And they needed somebody who knew judges in the South and who knew cookbooks in the South. And so they came to me and said, hey, would you like to serve on the Cookbook Awards committee? And I'd been a judge. I mean, a lot of people judge for them who don't actually serve on the committees. And I said, well, what's involved? And they said 4 free trips a year to New York for 9 years. And I went, oh, okay. So I went to my managing editor, Frank Barrows, and said, hey, I'm being offered a chance to do this. And I usually had to say no to things. I say no to a lot of things. I get offered a lot of trips that I cannot take. We're very specific on ethics and what we're allowed to accept.
If you guys want to send me them, I'll go. Sorry.
And so I went to Frank Barrows and said, hey, I can't do this, right? And he said, yes, you can. All they're asking you to use is your brain. They're not asking you to use your brand. They're not asking you to run anything in the paper. You don't have any advantages you can bring them. You're a nobody from a small paper in the South. I mean, sure, you can do it. So I started serving on their Cookbook Awards committee. And I got to the end of my three-year terms, and at a transition point, and they needed me to stay in an extra year. I ended up being the chair of the Book Awards Committee. Then they wanted to invent a new award. They wanted to come up with a way to do an award that wasn't just about chefs in big cities. They wanted to do something with sustainability, food policy, companies that were doing things better, like Nyman Ranch would be an example. And there was no award for any of those. So they asked me if I would invent one, because I know how bylaws work, and I'm a nudge. I get things done. And then I was going off again, and the chair of the awards committee at that time, a guy named John Washko, came to me and said, I want you to go off. You're good at working with people in committees. You're good at helping people figure out what they think. I'm the kind of person that will, if there's an 800-pound gorilla in the room, I'm going to say, hey, so what do you think about that 800-pound gorilla? And people like having me around. And I said, well, I can't just keep coming up here 4 times a year because you like to play with me. I have to have a job. So they finally ended up, they asked me what job I wanted, and there are 2 awards that the awards committee votes on. It's the only 2 things they do. They vote on humanitarian, and they vote on lifetime achievement. And nobody was in charge of them. So they were just kind of randomly choosing things. And I said, those are your bully pulpits. Those are where you really get to make a statement about what you believe. Hand them to me, and I will do research and bring you candidates that I've actually vetted and paid a lot of attention to what they do, and then you can make a more educated guess. So I did that for 3 years. Yeah. And then this year, May 2018, I said to him, okay, I've done this for 3 years now, and it's been 18 years when I was only supposed to be here 9 years, and I think I'm done. So, I decided I wanted to say bye-bye to the James Beard Foundation. I believe in the work they do. I think that they are trying to do it as honestly and openly and transparently as they can, and do a good thing. And I got to be a part of helping them do that for a long time. Time to let somebody else ride on the merry-go-round. I am replying to a tweet from Russ Parsons of the Los Angeles Times, who was lamenting how much he missed research pieces into food, and I'm agreeing with him.
Back to the Charlotte dining scene. Do you feel that we, meaning chefs particularly, are too fixated on the James Beard Award?
You are. I think so. I think
specifically
it's become,
related to Charlotte.
Yeah, it's become such a grail quest here. It's sucking up so much energy that you guys could be spending on the food scene in this city as it exists and as these people who live here need it to be, rather than chasing after that, the brass ring. Mm-hmm. Somebody's going to get the brass ring eventually. It will come, but the person who gets it usually is the person who isn't trying the hardest to reach it. I know I've been quoted back to, many chefs here quote me back to myself all the time, where I tell people, you want to get a James Beard Award, put your head down and cook.
Do the work.
Stop trying to get a James Beard Award. Focus on what you're doing, and focus on being consistent and thoughtful about what you're doing. And stop worrying about what everybody else thinks about you. I mean, I kind of feel like Charlotte in a lot of ways is an adolescent, and that's what you always want to tell an adolescent. Don't worry what people think about you.
Yeah. At least for me, observing, I'm a fan of the Charlotte dining scene. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've made no bones about it, right? And I was looking at the Charlotte dining scene, and I've always thought that, like, when I came in, it's like before me, there's like Tim Grudy, Chris Zion,
Gene Briggs.
Yeah. I know everybody forgets about Gene.
I know.
But
Gene,
these guys were like the first generation. Jay Pound.
Yeah.
He was sort of the it boy when I got here.
Yeah.
And I consider them to be the first generation, and I thought I was straddling sort of the second, maybe into the third. I think that we're just finishing up the first generation. Because all these people were homegrown-ish. Like, we were operating, even though I'm not from here, I feel like this is my home.
You've been around a while, yeah.
But now we've got people that are coming in because there's something going on here.
Because they want to be here.
Yeah. Like all the camaraderie that's built up over the last 10 to 12 years, particularly this community that's happening.
Yeah.
Billy Deason moved here because he sees the business growth that can happen, and it's a viable food scene.
Right. Look at Mike Knoll with Bardo. Came here from Chicago, spent 3-4 years as a stay-at-home dad, and then decided to build a restaurant that would be what he was doing back in Chicago, and really hitting it out of the park.
People are responding to it.
Yeah, look at Greg Collier. Greg came in from Memphis, was all over the country. He was in Arizona for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy's slamming it.
He's just a breakfast coach.
Ha 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 ha.
But I mean, that's exactly my point, though. We're really, and obviously I'm joking.
We got guys right now who are creative, and they're figuring out ways to do it differently, bringing us things that aren't just yet another shiny toy chain.
And these were exactly these points, and the ones that you brought up particularly, these were the things that made me realize that we're really just starting to see the second generation. Where you sit right now, what's most exciting to you that you think is a possibility? Not what you want to see, but what do you see percolating up right now that you're like, this could be something?
Well, Bardo would be a good example. The more sophisticated, limited menu, where you're focusing on, what's he got? His menu is 8 savories and 3 sweets, and they're all, smaller, thought out, not trying to be everything. Seeing a lot more diversity, people getting that opportunity. Greg, Michael Bowling popping up all over town. Jamie Sudreth, who's working for you now. Sudreth working for you.
Turner now.
Oh, is she?
Yes, she got married. It's Turner.
Oh, I sort of missed that wedding. I bet that was a fun wedding. I like her. She's so much fun.
She has great energy.
And so I do see that. One of the things that I've really noticed in the last few years is if you are talking about a second generation, the difference in that generation and the one that was before it is the camaraderie. There is a colleague sense going on. They were not opposed to one another in that first generation, but there was always a sense of, who's going to be the big dog.
Yeah.
I see a little bit less of that. I'm probably fooling myself, though, because I'm sure it's going on behind the scenes.
There's always, the thing is with chefs, it's always
competitive.
We are
world.
competitive.
It is a competitive world.
But I think it's
writers are too.
But I think it's the same kind of competitiveness, because I know just even exactly, it's exactly the same thing. I mean, traveling with poets, like I was saying earlier, some of the most difficult people to deal with, without a doubt, because there's a lot of ego involved.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You're putting your ego, your creativity in it. your skills and your ability in it, and you're going to have some skin in the game.
But the thing is
otherwise you're not doing it right.
But the thing is, you put skin into a game you love.
Yeah.
And if you love it, you're going to be a fan regardless. So you can't help but notice, even if you don't like the fact that this person just bested you, and it might only be for one night.
Yeah.
And I think that's...
You'll notice that, yeah. And get your feelings hurt sometimes if they're not respectful to one another. Biggest part of my job, management. Because stuff comes across constantly. I get hundreds of books a year. I open my mail and candy falls out.
So, as a food writer... You ended up writing 3 books.
I ended up branching out into books, and a lot of freelance. I do a lot of freelance, too.
But 2 of your 3 books are on booze.
Yeah, you noticed that, huh?
Yeah. Do you have a problem that we need to discuss? Can we lay this out? We've got couches back here. I feel like I do enough therapy as it is.
You know, the funny thing is the bourbon book in the Savor of the South series was a complete fluke. Mm-hmm.
In what way?
Well, the editor of the series is a wonderful editor named Elaine Maisner, who used to work for Greens in San Francisco. She worked for Deborah Madison. She actually has chef training, chef background. She's a really neat editor. And she came up with this series. And so she had asked me at the very beginning of the series, if you were to do a book, what would it be on? And I said pecans, because I'm from Georgia, and 50 recipes with pecans, no problem, could do that easily. She liked what I did, came back to me and wanted me to do a book on greens, southern greens, turnip greens, mustard greens, beet greens, all that stuff. My husband hates greens, hates collards, can't stand them, can't stand the smell of them cooking. And so I went to him and said, hey, Elaine called me, she wants me to write another book for Save of the South on greens. My husband said, I will leave you. I will not be able to live in the house with you for 6 months while you do this. And so I said, okay, what would you like it if I did? And we had been talking for a long time. We were always bourbon fans. We loved old cocktails back before they became cool. We were collecting cocktail gear and, making things like old fashions when none of our friends were doing this. But there were a lot of things about bourbon that I was curious about. I didn't know. We started talking one night, sitting around drinking a couple of cocktails. Is it really true that all that color comes just from the inside of a barrel? That can't possibly be true. And so I went to Elaine and said, hey, how about if I did a book on cooking with bourbon and why bourbon is Southern? And she said, no, it's not a beverage series, you can't do that. And I said, well, no, looking at bourbon as an ingredient, as a thing. And she said, yeah, I don't know. So I said, okay, tell you what, let me go home. I will write a list this weekend of 35 dishes I know I can come up with bourbon, and then we'll also include some drink recipes and stuff to round that out. She said, okay. So I went home that weekend, got out a notebook, just walked around all weekend scribbling down ideas for what you could do, sent the list to her. She called me up that day and said, okay, you sold me. We're going to do a book on bourbon. And it ended up being one of the best-selling books in the whole series. Ended up being a really big hit. People love that book. It still sells like crazy.
I mean, number one, why wouldn't it?
It's a perfect gift book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can give it to your dad.
But
Nobody knows what to give their dad.
It's not taking anything away from pecans, but this is way more exciting. You're right. I mean,
well, but you put them together and they're a party.
Well, and it's funny, but because this was I was like, you really kind of like these are both kind of similar flavor profile.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. That's a good point. And when I get little old ladies who are a little bit scared by bourbon, they'll always buy pecans. And then, so after that was done, Elaine called me one day and said, you're really good on whiskey. You seem to get this subject. And yeah, I do. I was raised around drinking. And she wanted me to do a book on the distilling industry, which was just really getting started. And it took us about 6 months shooting back and forth on, what could we do? She wanted me to do a guide that would have been a paperback book where I just called these distilleries and wrote a little paragraph in each one of them. And I said, I'm a reporter. I don't phone it in. I couldn't do that. I would be so bored. So I finally came up with the idea of what if we did it as a travel book and used it as a way to get people to go out into the South and see different areas of the South where they're making these different liquors and why those liquors are related to the places where they're made. And so we came up with that idea, and I had a year of complete and total insanity. I had 13 months to do it, including writing the manuscript, while doing a full-time job at a newspaper. I ended up going to 54 distilleries in 11 states in 12 months.
Wow.
While writing a book. Yeah.
How's your liver?
Actually, you know, everybody asks me that. I wasn't drinking that much because when you go into a tasting room, you're limited on what you can taste. In fact, Virginia is really, really strict on it. Quarter-ounce pours, you know? So you're not really drinking a whole lot when you're doing that.
So, but you had to sit down and write the book. So is that where BIC came in?
Yes, yes, I have. I showed you earlier. I had this thing. I had to be extremely disciplined. And so I have a desk at home, my little home office, and so I came up with this thing, and I had my husband make it for me, and I put it on my desk. So every time I walked by that room, it was shining right in my face. It stands, my husband, of course, says bitch in charge, but no, actually it is butt in chair, because that was what I had to spend a year. You know, I could not, I didn't have a vacation that year. Every moment of my vacation time was spent doing that.
Well, Kathleen, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
You as well.
Oh my goodness, you guys are like all professional. This is intimidating. I'm so scared.
They are, I'm not.
I'm so scared.
And there's our opener.
I was kidding. All right, we ready to roll?